Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort, Fairmont, and we're going to get started here in just a minute on service virtualization with Bas Dijkstra. So, first of all, I just want to ask if everybody can see my screen. You ought to see a title screen. So, if you can add to the questions, if somebody can jump in there into the questions section of your GoToWebinar and say, "Yep, I can see it," or "No, I can't." I've got a couple yeses already. Great, perfect. Thank you all. And I see some really familiar names. This is awesome. All right, great. Happy to see everybody. And also, you should be able to see me. And I'm looking snowed in, so hopefully you can see me. Great, nice beard. Okay, thanks, Richard. It's nice to have Richard on here. That's cool. Yeah, when your heroes start showing up on your webinar, you know you've made it. All right, great. So we are going to get started here in just a second. Let's do that. Thanks all for being here once again to the monthly webinars of Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services. My name is Paul Merrill. I am the leader at Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services, and I'm also the principal software testing engineer. So what I tend to do on these is I like to help folks learn about test automation. If you've never joined us before, hopefully you will have that result today. Beaufort Fairmont, a little bit about the company, is a company that helps with test automation. So we help solve two major problems. Number one is how do we sync up dev and testing in agile environments? And number two is how do we automate regression testing? We do that through training, consulting, and also project work. So if you need education within your group, if you need strategy within your group for test automation, or if you need a helping hand, so you want to hand some test automation work off to us or have us embed as dedicated remote resources from the United States on your team, we're happy to do that. Today, what we're doing is we're having a guest, Bas Dijkstra. If you don't know him, you're going to get to know him very soon. He is an expert in test automation and also service virtualization, something that is just a really cool topic, and I think you're going to love learning about it today. I want to make sure that we talk through a couple of upcoming events. So I have a webinar on C-Lights. It's my machine learning in testing speech and how machine learning is affecting testing. And I'm really looking forward to that. If you haven't seen this talk before, you're going to get to see it online through C-Lights. So go out to clights.io. They also have a pretty cool product. I don't get paid by them. I've looked at their product very briefly. It does code coverage for testing, and it does it in a less invasive way than we've done code coverage in the past. So take a look at that. TriTog is a local meetup here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's one that I help organize. That's at 6:30 on the 7th. So make sure to join us out there. Josh Kemp, a local guy, is going to be talking to us there about how to get a job in test automation. So that should be lots of fun. It's going to be at Lulu this time. So go to meetup.com and look for Triangle Test Automation Users Group for that one. On the 16th is our next webinar, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a second here. And finally, the 27th through the 28th of February. TISCA 2018 is a conference that we do locally, a regional testing conference in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And this is the first conference I ever spoke at. We have a terrific group of speakers. You guys all know Angie Jones, who spoke here twice in the last 3 months. She will be there speaking. We will do our Dominoes of Automation workshop. If you haven't been a part of that, you need to sign up today. Bob Galen's going to be there. Mary Thorne's going to be there. We've got Mark Tomlinson coming in. Mike Lyles is the keynote speaker. It's just packed full of terrific test automation speakers. It's a very great event, and the price is about $1,600 less than you would pay for the typical conference. So make sure to join us there. It's a 2-day event, workshops on the first day, sessions on the second day. Registration is filling up, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to have to find a way to get more food. So I'm hoping we run out of food, and I think we're going to do that. We've got some really terrific vendors to show their wares. So Aptly Tools is going to be there, Sauce Labs is going to be there, some really cool vendors as well, and Quali will be out there with some cool stuff. So make sure to join us if you're local for that. Just do not miss that. Finally, I mentioned the next webinar. This will be on the 16th, and I'm going to try something different. So I haven't spoken on these webinars in a while. I'm going to speak on this one, and I'm going to try out something that I haven't seen anybody do before, which is a virtual workshop. So we'll see if it works or not. There's probably a reason people don't do workshops on webinars, but we're going to find out what it is. So what I need you to do for this, if you're going to come, is get into a room with whiteboards and bring your whiteboard markers and be ready to talk. And if you have to sit alone in a cube, then bring something to talk to, or fake like you're talking to somebody on your phone during this thing, because I'm going to need you to talk out loud and talk through problems either by yourself or on this. We're going to talk about test automation and how our intentions are powerful, how we should be deciding, or how we can decide up front what it is we're trying to do, and how that affects our strategy and our tactics and how we do testing and how we use automation in testing with test automation. So join me for that. It's a pre-screening of my session for TISCA, my second half-day workshop for the TISCA conference. We're doing a pre-screening on this, so it's going to be cool. Finally, before I introduce Bas, I think the reason so many of you are joining these days is because I'm doing a $50 Amazon gift card giveaway. So if you're here for that, stick around until the end and you could get one of these. Make sure you're paying attention and you're ready at the end to celebrate with me. So without further ado, I'm going to make Bas the presenter, and I'm going to give you a little bit of his information here, the bio on him. Hopefully you can still see me and not my screen. So Bas helps teams and organizations improve their testing efforts through smart application of tools. Applying tools in the testing process should never be a goal in itself. Only through asking why to apply tools and what to use them for first will the how to implement a tool become successful. Bas strives to create awareness and instill realism when it comes to using tools as a means of supporting and speeding up the testing process. Bas delivers presentations, workshops, and training courses related to test automation and service virtualization on a regular basis, both at conferences and in-house with his clients. He regularly publishes blog posts on various topics related to test automation and service virtualization at ontestautomation.com. He's also written numerous articles for other websites and industry magazines. When he's not working, he likes to go for a run or sit down with a book and a good glass of Italian wine. He lives in Amersfoort, hopefully I got that right, the Netherlands, with his wife and 2 sons. And I'll tell you, the reason that I got Bas on here is we've had a couple email exchanges and a couple exchanges over Twitter. And whenever I talk to him, I know he knows his stuff about test automation. I enjoy talking to him and getting his take on exactly what he thinks about test automation. So Bas, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. Way of setting the bar.
Well, it's set high, so all you can do is go higher from here.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen at the moment?
I can. I think we are good.
Okay, let's go all the way back to the beginning of the presentation there. Are you, yeah, can you still see me? Can you still see the screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, let's get started then. Well, Paul, thank you very much for the introduction, for having me. I'm glad to be here. Well, you pretty much covered everything that's on this slide already, so let's get started. First of all, thank you everybody for joining this webinar. I'm going to take you on a little tour of a concept I've been working with over the past couple of years, which is called service virtualization. This is the starting point for most of the talks and presentations and workshops I give around this subject, because this is the situation that a lot of software developing companies are in right now, in recent years. There's not just a little bit of testing at the end of the software development process anymore. Testing is a continuous activity now. We test in dev environments, we test in test environments, in acceptance environments, we test in production. We pretty much test everywhere. And Dan Ashby did a great job of explaining the concept of continuous testing in DevOps situations, and I'm very happy to steal and reuse his image here. Testing is an activity that's everywhere. It's all around us. It's all through the development process now. I've got a small image of my own, which I also tend to use to explain the continuous testing process. We test continuously and we test continually now. So we test all the time in all the environments. It's pretty much another way of representing what Dan did with the image you saw in the previous slide. This is my own take of it, and this is my own interpretation of it, of the continuous testing. Well, it's not even a trend anymore. It's just a reality for a lot of organizations and software development teams nowadays. And this is, to me, what continuous testing looks like. One of the big challenges with test automation and continuous testing, though, is test environments. A couple of years ago, a market research organization called Vogue did a bit of research on service virtualization, and mainly on the part of that research that I want to focus on is the troubles that development teams and software developing organizations have in their test environments. There are a staggering 81% of software development teams of the people that took the survey experience delays in development due to incomplete or malfunctioning test environments. And if you ask the software testers, that number is even higher. It's an 84% that experience testing delays due to test environments not being ready, not being in the right state for continuous testing. So they want to test all the time, they want to test more, they want to test faster, but the test environments aren't cooperating. Of the people that took the survey, on average, in a software development project, they need around 52 dependencies in their during the course of the development process, but only 23 of those can be accessed without restriction. So only 23, less than half of all those dependencies, are available at all times and are in the right state for the testing efforts that they want to carry out at all times. And that's something that service virtualization tries to address, of course. So that's a little bit of background for what we're going to talk about today. What do those dependency troubles look like? Say we have a system on the test, and the system on the test is not an isolated monolith anymore. I don't think that's new for anybody who's listening to this webinar right now. Hey, your system on the test might be connected to a mobile app, to a third-party SaaS dependency, to some sort of backend system, or maybe even a mainframe. And the trouble in a lot of test environments, also with the clients that I've worked with and that I visit, are that, for example, yes, my system on the test should be talking to a mobile app. In not just in production, but also if you want to carry out your testing somewhere, you should be able to talk to a mobile app to do integration testing. But because different development teams are working on different components of the overall system, it might be that the mobile app is still under development, so you can't use a suitable test version of your mobile app for integration testing. The same for the SaaS dependency. Maybe it's available, but especially if it's a third-party dependency, maybe they charge for every message that you send to them, which might not be the biggest trouble if you're doing functional testing, but if you also want to do performance testing, and if you want to do performance testing on a regular basis, then this might quickly become a very expensive process. The backend system maybe has test data issues, so it's accessible, but it's very hard to set up the right test data for your integration testing in that backend system. So so that's what's keeping you from being able to do integration testing on a continuous basis or even on a regular basis. And finally, with mainframes, mainframes are notoriously hard to set up in test environments, expensive to set up test environments for, and maybe if you even have a test environment for your mainframe, maybe there's only one that's for which the access is shared between a lot of different development teams. So you only have access to the test environment of your mainframe at specific slots during the day or during the week, which also is a bit of a blocker for your continuous testing efforts. And this is exactly these troubles, these dependency troubles, is exactly where service virtualization comes into play. Instead of the physical real test environment of the mobile app, of the SaaS dependency, of the backend system, of the mainframe, we use simulations. Service virtualization, which I'll explain shortly, is all about simulation. So instead of having a test environment for the mobile app or the SaaS dependency, we use simulations that simulate the behavior of that app, so you can test, do more easier integration testing with it. And the trick with service virtualization is to the goal of service virtualization is to remove the blocks that you that you saw in the previous slide. So you have unrestricted access with regards to just physical access to the simulations, but also you have the key is that you have full control over the behavior and of the simulation or the test data that's in it, so you can do much more testing with it. That's pretty much what service virtualization is all about in a nutshell. It focuses on dependency behavior. So if you want to do integration or end-to-end testing, it's not really important how the simulation, what's in service virtualization is called a virtual asset or just a simulation, or you might want to call it a stub or whatever. It's not important how that simulation is implemented. The only thing that's really important is the behavior that the virtual asset, that the simulation exerts, because that has to be exactly the right simulation, or sorry, exactly the right behavior to support your testing and your automation efforts. So and that's like I always say with test automation, it's not something that replaces testing, it's something that supports testing. For service virtualization, it's exactly the same thing. It's an activity, it's a development activity, it's a software development activity that should support testing and test automation. It should never be a goal in itself, because it's I'll show you some tools later on. I'll give you some short demos later on, and it's very easy to go wild with those tools and make all sorts of very fancy, very realistic simulations. But the key is to do just the right amount of simulation that to support your testing and your test automation activities, and nothing more. And as I said before, the key benefit of service virtualization, in my opinion, is that it allows you to regain control over your test environment. So instead of having to rely on other development teams, other organizations, or dependencies in your test environment that are only partly accessible, that are hard to access, that are impossible to access, impossible to set up, it allows you to regain control over your test environment by making available simulations that you can fully control. That you can control the behavior, you can control the test data that's in it, and so on. This is a discussion I've been having with with some people in the past. Isn't service virtualization pretty much the same as stubbing or mocking, which are at least to a lot of people much more familiar terms, familiar concepts. If you want to call it stubbing or mocking, that's fine with me. It's to me, it's not that important what you want to call it, as long as we're all talking about the same thing. And what I tend to do nowadays is not talk about service virtualization or stubbing or mocking or whatever, but just talk about simulation and using simulations to that help you, like with test automation, using simulations to support your testing process. And that's what's the important part. Is it's not important if you call it service virtualization, if you call it stubbing, if you call it mocking. And I'll get to this later, but I've a couple of years ago, it's about a year and a half now, I think, I released a little ebook on service virtualization, in which I more explicitly pointed out some what I thought were key differences between stubbing and mocking on the one hand and service virtualization on the other hand. Again, if you want to call all of this stubbing or simulation or service virtualization, it doesn't really matter to me. But if you want to, if there is a difference between those concepts, it's that as stubbing and mocking is mainly, and I'm not going to read out the whole slide for you, because that's just boring. But as stubbing and mocking is targeted on, oftentimes it's targeted to a single development team, a single dependency. It's less rich in features, whereas service virtualization is more targeted at the enterprise environment, and especially with the sophisticated commercial service virtualization tools, they are very rich in their features, and they can be used across the enterprise. And it's mainly it's stubbing. It's still stubbing, but it's stubbing on a different scale. So if you want to make it a difference between stubbing and mocking on the one hand and service virtualization on the other end, this is pretty much what I want to call. But again, I'm fine if we all call it service virtualization or stubbing or simulation. Paul, are there any questions so far?
Hey, there are, Bas. So why don't we do this? Let's take a little break. And what I'm going to do is a couple things. While you guys are typing your questions into the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel, or thinking through them and ready to raise your hand with a question through the control panel, I'm going to do a couple polls. So first, here's the first poll. I always ask this. I ask, what is your role? Because it helps me understand kind of who's here and why they're here, and what they might be thinking of. And it might help us tailor the discussion a little bit. So right now I'm doing a poll for this. What is your role? So there's several options here, and I've kind of narrowed these down. I know they're generic, guys, but tester, developer, manager, other, whichever one you identify most with. Generally the manager one, I like to think of the people who at least one person should do what they tell them to do. They don't have to actually do what you tell them to do, but they should do that. And all of a sudden manager gets a bump. There we go. All right, cool. So we're about as far as we usually get on this. We're at 80%, which is pretty good. 82. You guys are great. So I'm going to close this poll up, and I'm going to share the results, and we'll see what we saw, what we got here. And it looks like most of the folks are testers, which is what we would expect, and then a few managers in there, and a couple devs and some other. And I'm always interested in what other is. So if you want to let me know that sometime, that's fine.
Yeah. So why? Why?
Why do I want to know what the other is?
No, I'm curious too. What other roles are present here?
Oh yeah, I know. Maybe it's salespeople, maybe it's marketing people. You never know. You never know. So let's see. I've got one other question here I'm going to do real quick on this poll, and this is one that Bas specifically asked me to ask you guys. So this is going to help with his presentation, I believe. He says, in a typical integration or end-to-end test run, how many external dependencies are required? And so I think this is probably a little difficult to answer for folks. So do you want to give them a little bit of guidance as people are asking questions and doing the poll here?
No, well, I see some answers coming in already. It's a bit, it's a bit hard to answer off the top of your head, because first of all, what's a typical test run, and what a lot of people may be unsure as to what the environment around their application look like, and what is a dependency. But basically, a dependency is anything that you rely on for integration or end-to-end testing, for which the development team you're in is not primarily responsible.
Great, that's great. Yeah, so we got about 56%, 60% there. So I'm going to close that and share the results with you very quickly, and then we're going to get into some of these questions quickly. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions as well, and we'll have one more question breakout here. But it looks like 1 to 5 is what most people have. And you know, sometimes you just don't know. And I think that it's easy to forget that plenty of people just don't have any idea how many integrations there are in their system. So, and it depends, someone says, a friend of mine whose team got beat in the playoffs the other day asked. So anyway, he'll understand that. So here are a couple questions for you. Let's see. Hi, we use WireMock to mock our Spring Boot microservices. Now we think about, and let me close out this results section. We use WireMock to mock our Spring Boot microservices. Now we think about to provide mocks via Spring Boot. The reason is that we think that developers like to provide mocks. What do you think about this approach? I'm not sure I fully understand that, but he tried to elaborate. We'd like to provide mocks if it uses the same language as the developer is using.
So yeah, well, Spring is the. I'm not too familiar with Spring, I must admit. But I think it's a Java framework, and WireMock is a Java-based tool as well. I'll actually be giving a very basic WireMock demo later on during the webinar.
Perfect. We've got.
Yeah. Well,
I interrupted you. Sorry.
No problem. Go ahead, Paul.
So here's one more. Well, you know what? I think people are just not ready with questions yet. So let's just move on here.
No problem at all. We'll move on. We'll just move on. No problem at all. Why should I use service virtualization, or stubbing or simulation or whatever? For me, there are 3 key benefits for using service virtualization as part of your testing and automation efforts. First of all, it allows you to easily test more than what you would be able to do with traditional test environments. If you have full control over the behavior of the dependencies that you talk to, that you integrate with during integration and end-to-end testing, then it's a lot of times it's very hard to set up edge cases. And when you're talking to actual test environments of the dependencies that you're working with, especially if those dependencies are outside of your control, if they're third-party applications, it might be very hard to be able to set up specific data or specific state or specific behavior for edge cases. And if you have full control over the dependencies, over the simulated dependencies, then testing edge cases is much easier. So it allows you to increase your test coverage in that way. The same goes for error conditions. If you talk to a third-party dependency in your during your testing, and you want to see how your application behaves when that third-party application is unavailable or is behaving erroneously, it might be very hard to set up those situations, and maybe you can coordinate it so that you can do it once or twice. But if you want to do continuous testing, if you want to test early, if you want to test often, then it might be very hard to simulate those error conditions if you're working with actual applications. So in that case, simulations or virtual assets can be much easier to handle, to wield if you want to test those error conditions. And finally, one specific aspect of service virtualization that I really like is the ability not only to control the functional behavior. So if I send a message to simulation X, then it returns a specific type of response, but also being able to control the performance characteristics, and especially with mobile applications and IoT applications, performance and timeouts and syncing is a key part of the overall testing process. And if you are able to, with the press of a button, to control the performance characteristics of the dependencies that you're talking to in your testing process, that enables you to test so much more than what you would do with traditional test environments. It might also allow enable you to test earlier. So because components are often developed in parallel in different teams within the same organization or even across different organizations, that dependency that you want to talk to for integration testing might not be ready yet, or might just be down or under development because the development teams are working on it or haven't finished their work yet, and you want to test. So, but often the contracts, or and by contracts I mean the layout and the way the messages look like that are exchanged between the applications are already set in front, because that allows the development teams to develop against a specific. So they know what the messages that their respective applications should send are. The format of it is known, and the data types that are in it are known. So you can easily develop simulations against those contracts that adhere to those contracts. And if you build a simulation that uses that contract, that's generated from the contract maybe, then you can also start testing earlier. And when you test earlier, that's also a key to finding your defects earlier. So with service virtualization, you don't have to wait anymore until all of the dependencies are fully developed and ready for testing, for integration and end-to-end testing. And as I said earlier as well, you can test more often because there's no more waiting for dependencies to be ready, as I said in the previous slide. But also with simulations, it's very easy to reset the state of the dependency to a specific state, a specific performance characteristics, a specific set of test data, a specific, I don't know what, with just the click of a button, and especially if you provide these simulations in some sort of container or virtual image or whatever. It's just a matter of building the pipeline again, and the simulations are recreated in exactly the same state as the previous test run, just with the click of a button. And that's something that's very hard to do if you're talking against real test environments of real applications. But with simulations, with steps, with service virtualization, that's much easier. And because you've got full control over all of the test data that's in it, you don't have to worry that you'll use up specific limited sets of test data in those that are present in those dependencies. For example, if you have a limited subset of zip codes or phone numbers or whatever you're using in your integration and end-to-end testing, and you can only use those ones if you've got full control over the simulation, and if you're able to reset the state of the dependency with the click of a button, then you can use the same set of test data over and over and over again, and test again and again and again, instead of having to wait for someone else to either reset the state of the dependency, or to or wait until he or she adds another set of test data so you can continue testing. So if you want to start with service virtualization, how do I start? First of all, and I think I mentioned this briefly earlier, it's software development again, and like with test automation, that's something that we hear a lot now. Test automation is software development. Well, I've got a bit of news for you. If you want to do service virtualization, that's software development as well. And again, it doesn't matter if the service virtualization tool you use is a tool where you write the simulations in code, or you have a graphical user interface that helps you set up the simulations in a more user-friendly manner. It's still software development. You're creating artifacts that you're using throughout the software development and software testing process. So this is a piece of software development, and you should apply good software development practices like version control. If you build simulations, you should test those simulations as well. So it's not just a matter of building some stubs and then be done for it until the end of time. Be done with it until the end of time. It's something that it's yet another artifact in your software development process that you need to test, that you need to maintain, that you need to version, and so on. And like with all kinds of software development, it's a good idea to start small. Just pick one dependency that's bugging you in your testing efforts. Start small, build a small simulation that maybe just covers one or two of the happy flows, and see if it speeds up your development and testing process. If you're able to test more, if you're able to test earlier, if you're able to test more often. Learn from what you see, learn from what you do, evaluate often, get feedback early from everybody that's involved in the software development process. See, and show them, I've built this virtual asset, and now we can do this and this and this more testing than what we could do initially. Is this useful to you, and does it weigh up against the additional costs and the additional effort of implementing the service virtualization? And that's something that's very important if you go this route. And again, do just enough to support the testing that's required. It's very tempting to build the most sensational simulation that covers all the different kinds of edge cases that you might ever want to test in the future. But the key here is to do just enough simulation to support the testing that's required. And finally, and that's a bullet point I forgot to include in the slide, so my apologies for that, but this is not Surfer is not a replacement for actual integration and end-to-end testing. So it might help you if done correctly to speed up your testing efforts, speed up your testing process, but in the end, always make sure to test against the real thing before you go live. Or if you're really quick with your delivery process, from time to maybe there's no time to test against the real thing every time you do a deployment, but make sure to do it periodically to make sure that your service virtualization isn't too much out of sync with the thing that it's simulating and causing, and doesn't catch all kind of bugs that show up when you test against the real thing, or when you are in production and talking against the real thing. So it's something that helps you in your testing efforts, but it's definitely not a 100% replacement for testing against the real thing. Like with test automation, there are two ways to create simulations. First of all, there's record and playback, which is a concept most of you probably know from the automated testing world. Unlike test automation, I use record and playback from time to time when I work with inverse service virtualization projects, and that's mainly because it's not always specified or documented what the messages look like that are passed from one system from one component or one application to the next. A record and playback by having your service virtualization tool act as a proxy. It's an easy way to find out what messages are sent when you click a button, when you perform a certain action in your application. And if it's not documented or not specified what those messages are, and that happens more often than you would think, then record and playback is a good way to find out what the messages look like. And as with test automation, you can also build from spec, from Swagger or ROML definitions for REST APIs, or for WSDL contracts for SOAP-based APIs, for example, and you can use those specifications to generate simulations as well. Seeing that we don't have too much time anymore, and I want to allow for some questions at the end, I'll skip this one. Paul, how are the questions going?
There's a couple here, Bas. I definitely want to see this demo because that is the coolest part of this, I think. Seeing is believing. So here's a question by Jessica. She asks, where does service virtualization happen? Is it deployed to the test environment, like the system under test, or is it a module within the test framework? Great question.
That's a great question indeed. Thank you very much. Consultant answer, it depends. Now, it really depends on your, it's an activity that supports your testing efforts. So it happens wherever your testing happens. Typically, in most projects where I've done this, it's something that is deployed in a test environment, and or an acceptance environment maybe. So once or twice, I've even supplied simulations to developers, to which they could run on their local environment, so they could do earlier integration testing and do integration testing even before they committed the code to version control. But yeah, again, it depends. It's not a goal in itself, and there's no one right way to do this, and it's just making sure that it fits your testing effort and your software development process.
That's great. Yeah. So another question a lot of people are asking is basically, how do you create it? I know you told us, but I think when you show it, it's going to be a little different. And I have 3 questions here from Victor that are all kind of getting at that. He's asking, you don't necessarily know how these dependencies work. He says, this may be a third-party application. How do you mimic the behavior, or how can you scan to get it? Or is there some kind of simplified mock of it? And he says, you don't have access to a lot of this stuff.
No.
How do you reverse engineer these services? And I think since I've jumped in here and kind of figured some of this out on my own and done some demos with tools like Hoverfly, I think when you demo this, it's going to be really clear, right?
I'm not actually going to demo the way that I would typically do this, but what I would do is, and most of the service virtualization solutions out there are occupied with a proxy option. So you can just put it as a man in the middle between your application and the dependency, and it just forwards all of the traffic both ways. But what it does is it records all of the message exchanges, all of the traffic that's being passed from application A to application B and vice versa. So if you execute all of the test cases that you want to support with your simulation, and have the service virtualization act as a proxy, then it's able to record all of the traffic. And from that traffic, you can then automatically generate with one click of a button, generate a simulation, so that for subsequent test runs, for future test runs, you don't need the dependency anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I know I can be thrown off by some of this language sometimes. So I'm just going to say, I know for myself, just thinking through what is a proxy and how does that work, and when you actually go and do this. So if you go out to what are some of the good tools for this? I know you're going to get into that, right? Hoverfly and what else?
Yeah, I'll mention some of the tools. Basically, every serious service virtualization solution has a proxy option. So it has the ability to just listen on the line and see what messages are passed between two applications that talk to one another during integration testing, and then record all of that traffic and simulate it in further test runs.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Cool. And then you can modify those and change those along the way, right?
yeah, that's pretty much the record and playback option that I addressed earlier. It's
Gotcha.
using the service virtualization solution as a proxy.
Great. And then we got one more here I'm going to do before we get into the last segment. Richard is asking, Richard all the way from the UK, he asks, I've heard a lot of pros, but very little cons. Can you share some cons of service virtualization? The
Oh
glass is
yeah.
half full, Richard. Come on, man.
No, that's a very legitimate, very good question. As I said, it can help you to test test more often, test earlier. But first of all, it's yet another software development effort that you're introducing uh, to your process and to your team, and it's something that needs to be maintained, and it needs to be it needs to be built. At the time and effort needs to be spent, knowledge needs to be gained and exchanged in order to be able to do this successfully and to keep doing this. And one other thing is that it's not always so easy to keep your simulation and the development of the actual dependencies in sync. So and especially if those dependencies are developed by another team, or that's in another building, or maybe even another organization, then you need to keep a very close eye on the interface and whether the behavior that your simulation exerts is still realistic enough to support your testing efforts. And if one of the dependencies has an upgrade and it changes something in the interface and in the way it behaves, and you don't adapt your simulation accordingly, then you're basically testing against the past. And that's something that you really need to be aware of when you're doing service virtualization.
That's great. And I joke about talking about the cons. I think it's so important when you hear any kind of argument or any kind of promotion of anything, for a really, really good proponent, somebody who knows their stuff is going to tell you the pros and cons of using something particular. That's how you know you've got a real expert, because they know that you're gonna work with them and do what's best for them if they're giving you both the pros and cons. If they only give you the pros, I tend to question that. So I think that's a terrific question, and I love the fact that you're able to walk through that. That's great.
Yeah, and thanks again, Richard, for asking that, because it's something that in my enthusiasm I might I might forget about a little. But there are definitely cons against cons in using this this approach. Like with test automation, there are a lot of pros, but there are a lot of cons as well, and they need to be addressed as well for people to get an objective and an informed view of the field.
That's great. There are a couple more questions here, but I think let's move forward and see if you answer them. And if you don't, and we have time at the end, we'll take them then.
Yep. Cool. So before we get into the demos, I'd like to give you a short list of some of the most popular service virtualization tools that are out there. Like with test automation tools, we can classify them in open source tools. Two of the most prominent ones are, the most popular ones are Wiremock, which we'll see a bit later on in a demo, and Hoverfly, which you, Paul, experimented with yourself, which I experimented with myself as well. Both of these are developed in the UK by one is, I'll talk about Wiremock a little later, and Hoverfly is developed by Spectral Labs. As with test automation, there are quite a few. All of the big software testing tool vendors have a service virtualization tool in their portfolio now. We'll be seeing a short demo of the Parasoft Virtualize tool, but vendors like Tricentis, CA, Micro Focus, and smaller ones like Traffic Parrot offer commercially licensed service virtualization solutions as well. And as with test automation tools, the main difference between these two classes is the number of features and what they what types of audience they target. Some of those and that's an interesting, a good sort of gateway drug into service virtualization is some of these commercially licensed tools also offer a community edition, which you can download and use for free until eternity. And the two most prominent ones of those are there's a community edition of Parasoft Virtualize, which we'll see a bit later on as well. And I know also Traffic Parrot offers a community edition, and both those community editions offer a limited set of features, but are very useful tools in their own right, and deserve some attention if you're looking into adopting service virtualization as part of your testing and development efforts. Wiremock, it's the first of two tools I want to give a short demo for. It's a simulator for HTTP-based APIs. The way you set up these simulations is either through Java code, and I know Hoverfly does it as well. I know if you've seen that, Paul, you can, with Wiremock, you can either write your simulations through Java code, which makes it very easy to put into version control to distribute with your production code and with your automated tests. And you can do it through JSON response definitions, which is the way I'll be using it in the demo. And the main difference is that you can use Wiremock either in process during your automated test runs, in which you typically would build the simulations through Java code, or you can use it as a standalone process and have it run on a machine and let multiple teams access it at all times. And then you would typically specify the behavior of your simulation in JSON documents. It also offers a record and playback option as a proxy, which we discussed before. It's developed and maintained by a guy in the UK called Tom Akerst. And if you want to know more about the tool, here's the website. So our the demo simulation that I built is a very, very simple API that's translating words from English to Italian. For now, there are only two translations available, one for cat and one for dog. I've got Wiremock running here. It's running in standalone modus at this specified port. So when I go talk to the simulation and I say I want to translate the word cat from English to Italian, you'll see here that it translates cat to the Italian representation, which is il gatto. I've got, as you can see, I've specified the the responses that YMOC is able to return in JSON documents. I've got another one for dog. Oops. Here we go. Ilkane. But let's say my testing process requires me to also translate butterfly. And as you can see, we don't have a simulation for this, or we don't have our YMOC simulation doesn't know how to answer this yet. So let's make a copy of the response that we see for dog, edit it. So what you specify here is at the top part of this JSON document specification says what request is answered by this response. So we answer to an HTTP get. Remember that YMOC only response can only be used for HTTP based APIs. So we respond to a get call, and the URL is instead of we want to respond to a get method on this URI, and the response that we're going to return is basically we return an HTTP status code of 200. We return a header that says that the content type is application /JSON, and the JSON body says our query was butterfly, and the translation is la farfalla. So let's save this. We need to restart YMOC because it reads all of the available responses in memory. So let's start it again, and now instead of YMOC not being able to respond to this API call, if we do a refresh, we can see that now our simulation returns the response that we defined in that JSON response specification that we just added. And that's basically how you, of course, YMOC can do lots more than just this simple. It has different matching strategies where we matched the request and response based on the URL here. You can also match requests and responses based on specific header values, specific elements in the body of the request, specific cookies that you set, specific authentication schemes. So YMOC offers a lot of different types of features in that way. In everything that you can do in the JSON response definition, you can also do in code. So with the Java DSL offers exactly the same set of features. So that's YMOC. The other tool that I'd like to demonstrate to you shortly is the community edition of Parallel Virtualize. It's a community edition of a commercially licensed offering. Of course, there's a limited set of features when you compare it to the full-blown commercially licensed version, but there's still a lot of features in the community edition that might be useful for you if you're taking your first steps in service virtualization. Again, I'll remind you that the version that I'm showing, my apologies, the version that I'm showing you here is the community edition. So I'm not tricking you into by showing you the fully licensed version. And this is the website for the community edition of the product if you want to know more about it and check it out for yourself. So the community edition, Virtualize lives inside Eclipse, and basically what I've created here is is exactly the same simulation as I created with YMOC. So I have the same service. I have a responder defined which returns a specific JSON document. I tell the responder here that it should respond to everything that it should listen on this specific HTTP endpoint. And what's cool about this tool is that you can use data sources to dynamically populate the responses based on what you get in your requests. So instead of having to create a specific sorry, a specific JSON document for every response that you want the responder to return, you just create one generic responder and you attach a data source to it. And what you're telling it here is look at the URL parameter with index 1, so the second parameter, which is the if you remember the request that we're sending is the kind of animal, the word that we want translated, and link that to a data source column. And I've got the data source here, query. So it looks up the the parameter value in the data source, and it sees if it's present there, and if so, it uses the whole record to populate the response. So again, that runs on a different port. Let's see, hopefully it's still running. And it is. So if this is, I'm talking to my Parasoft virtualized simulation now, and if I say I want to translate cat, then it says il gatto. If I want to translate dog, it says il cane. And if I want to translate butterfly, it says I can't respond to this because I don't know how. So if I want to extend my simulation here to be able to also talk to this one, I add butterfly here. I say la farfalla again. I save this. And what you see here is that it, because it lives inside a it runs on a Tomcat server inside of the Source virtualization tool here. I don't need to restart it again. It automatically sees that I've changed something in the definition of my simulation, so it automatically redeploys the simulation. And if I do a refresh, it now knows how to respond to this test case, so to say. So that's basic, and of course, even in the community, there are a lot more useful features that Virtualize provides, but if we want to cover all of this, I need another webinar or two.
Well, maybe we can arrange that sometime.
We sure can. Maybe we'll see. That's and also I think we're right on time. That's basically what I wanted to tell you and show you today. Final reminder: I talked a little bit earlier about a little ebook that I've written. It's published at O'Reilly. It's a free download, and you can get it from my website. It's just a right-click save as PDF link. So. No need for registration or leaving your personal details anywhere. You can just download it. Again, thank you everybody for the attention. If you want to contact me after this webinar and at any point in the future, find me at ontestautomation.com via email, via Twitter, via LinkedIn, or whatever. Over to you, Paul.
That was great. Thank you so much, Bas. Like you said, we are close on time here, so I'm not going to take more questions. Would you be open to answering a few of the questions that didn't get answered later offline? Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Great. Make sure to follow Bas at _ Bas Dijkstra over on Twitter, or find him on LinkedIn. Make sure that you see him on his site, ontestautomation.com. And what I want to know, Bas, I want to know how to get control of this thing back here. How do I do this? How do I make myself a presenter? And
I
then
can do that.
secondly,
I can do that for you.
do that for me. That's great. And then secondly, what I want to know is who is going to win this gift card. So I still don't have a drum roll button. I need a drum roll
There
button.
you
So if
go.
anybody has one, make sure to just send me the link for that. So who's going to win? And the winner is Christine M. So there's only one Christine M on here. So if you're Christine M, hopefully you are jumping and yelling in your cube right now because you just won the Amazon gift card. So thanks everybody for being here. Once again, my name is Paul Merrill from Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services. Call me and let's talk through your test automation challenges. You know where to go to see these webinars, where to go to find blogs I've written. I also write on Tech Beacon, and I'm going to start writing on Applitools. So make sure that you check that out. Join us for TISCA in a few weeks. If you if you didn't know, Parasoft is one of our sponsors there. So if you want to talk to them about this tool or other tools, you can join us in Chapel Hill at the end of February. Go to TISQA on your Google, and it should give you some good results. Ask me about office hours. So this is something I'm doing. If you want to bring my expertise into your team without having full-time me there, then we can do that through office hours. So ask me about that, send me a note, and let's get that worked out. So thank you all very, very much for being here. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you're in the Southeast and you're experiencing snow, get on your snowshoes and your snow boots and go enjoy it like you have those, right? So go enjoy it, and everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks so much again, Bas, and we will see you guys on the 16th of February here again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.